Yes, it's goodbye, farewell, and so long as the Mid-States 4, accompanied by Jerry Beeler, take off from Midway Airport in Chicago on June 20th, 1951, for a 5-week tour of the Far East Command to entertain our troops. Our families and friends who came to the airport to see us off wave goodbye as we climb aboard our TWA Constellation for the trip west. The ship climbed rapidly to 18,000 feet, heading west for what we thought was going to be an unadventurous trip. Over the Rocky Mountains, however, we encountered a terrific snowstorm with a temperature of 20 degrees below zero that blew us eventually 250 miles off course. On landing late that evening in San Francisco, we were met by the barbershoppers of that chapter, who entertained us royally. And the following morning, a truck and car were put at our disposal through the kind offices of 2 members of the Frisco chapter, Al Boatwright and Don Keefe. Our 14 pieces of luggage were loaded aboard in short order, and we headed out for Travis Field, our point of embarkation. Jerry rode with Al in the truck, from which he waved genially. Not to be outdone, Al waved also. Whiling away the day at Travis Field, we tried to outguess each other on what type of aircraft would bear us overseas. Would it be a beautiful Boeing Stratocruiser? Maybe it would be a C-54 cargo ship. Whoever guessed that, guessed right. It was a C-54. We boarded the plane at 5:30 p.m. Friday afternoon, everyone scrambling for a choice seat. Did I say choice seat? They were hair-padded bucket seats and very, very unwieldy. We spent the next 40 hours crossing the Blue Pacific, trying to find comfortable positions. We boarded the ship and taxied way out to the far end of the run available. Heading west, all aboard took one last long look at San Francisco, the Bay Area, Golden Gate Bridge, Treasure Island, and the good old USA. We had an opportunity to meet our captain, a man who had flown around the world 17 times. Our co-pilot, a former United Airlines pilot, the navigator, whose miraculous navigating brought us eventually right down to tiny Wake Island in the middle of the Pacific. On board, a man who spoke 17 languages and who was going overseas for intelligence to interrogate prisoners. A Navy lieutenant medical officer returning to his assignment. On Wake Island, the obstinate motor that had caused us many anxious moments over the Pacific required a full hour for repair. We really were worried. When our flight was announced, we were photographed by a colonel of the Army as we left the terminal building. Oh well, this proves we were on the other side of the world. Here's a Japanese warship that had evidently been sunk in the harbor during World War II. Looks like a Hollywood movie set, doesn't it? The last leg of our trip was an 11-hour stretch from Wake to Tokyo. Our first glimpse of Tokyo revealed a civilization far below the American standards. We spent the day securing medical clearances and getting more shots, a total now of 17, picking up our GI issue and having pictures taken for our identification cards, which were of great importance. Without these, we would have been shot as spies had we been captured by the enemy. A likely-looking bunch of characters, weren't we? The next morning, all decked out in our fatigues, we loaded our paraphernalia, including a string base furnished by Special Services, on a 3/4-ton truck and drove off to the Haneda Air Base. Here we again speculated on what type of equipment would take us 600 miles from Tokyo to Daegu in Korea. This time, however, we drew a sleek Navy ship. We donned our Mae Wests and parachutes and took off over Tokyo Bay. Mount Fujiyama rises majestically through the clouds as we cross the Japan Sea with its tiny, picturesque volcanic islands. At Daegu, we were met by Colonel Shrewsbury, head of special services for the 8th U.S. Army in Korea, USAC. We were able to study at close hand the land that was to be our home for 21 days. These natives bathe and do their laundry in this river, and then use the water for cooking and drinking. Here's where we were warned not to drink any water except from approved sources. Evidence of our attempts to organize barbershop quartets is this Korean quartet of Papa-sans. However, we couldn't get them to sing a note for us. After our first show in Korea for 800 men at the USAC Theater in Daegu, we were ushered onto a C-47 transport bound for Seoul and the front lines, the squatting South Korean watching unconcernedly. We poured on some coal and climbed to 4,000 feet, just enough height to clear the forbidding mountainous terrain on our way north. This scenery is typical of all of South Korea. We landed at the Seoul City Airport, or what was left of it, and back on terra firma, we spotted some P-51 fighter planes loading up with ammunition and gasoline, preparing to take off for the front lines. Our duffel was loaded on a truck, and we were loaded into some jeeps that took us across the Han River over the only remaining bridge, where our anxiety about the water we were to use was allayed, as we were told of the ingenious manner in which Army engineers pump water out of the river through processing equipment and store it for future use in huge rubber tanks, completely free of harmful bacteria. We took a few minutes to observe the devastation of the city of Seoul, first from this distance, and then close up. This was once a thriving community of 800,000 souls, now just a shell of its former self. Back into our jeeps again, we headed through Seoul, driving over the smooth concrete highways so numerous in Korea. Fording rivers where bridges had been bombed out, and we headed north. For our first night near the front lines, we stayed with the 25th Division at Monsan-ni. Our equipment was unloaded, including the footlocker furnished by Special Services for our costumes, the only civilian clothing we had with us. Our cots were set up by thoroughly efficient aides, Sergeant Bill Roloff and Corporal McCorkle. Strike a medal for two grand guys. The next day, as men of the 25th Division prepared a stage for us on the edge of a rice paddy, we had our first glimpse of battle-weary, entertainment-starved troops from the front lines. The bright sun was almost unbearable, so every inch of available shade was utilized by our audience. After this show, we hopped back into the jeeps and headed for our next show point, over the bumps we were beginning to dread. En route, we passed the much-publicized Hill 609, scene of many a bloody battle. The number of men in this audience was amazing to us at the time. They totaled some 1,800 and were fully battle equipped, having just come in off the battle lines. After that last jeep ride over the dusty roads, it took us an additional 30 minutes while the men set up our amplifying system to try and remove a portion of the dust accumulated from Korea's concrete highways. Jerry tried brushing it off, as did Art and Forey, but brushing barely scratched the surface, so to speak. So we tried to rinse it off, putting water in our helmets. Found that songs we'd considered outdated stateside were very popular with the boys, as witness Tennessee Waltz. I was dancing with my darling to the Tennessee Waltz when an old friend I happened to see. I introduced him to my loved one, and while they were dancing, my friend stole my sweetheart from me. I remember the night and the Tennessee Waltz. Now I know just how much I have lost. Yes, I lost my little darling the night they were playing the beautiful Tennessee Waltz. With their grateful applause lingering in our ears, we took off again, crossed the 38th parallel, and took a 3-hour jaunt over 2 mountains. We ran into a little difficulty when the Jeep that Jerry was riding in stalled halfway up, and all of the loads had to be readjusted. This was quite a feat, considering the precarious road that was literally scraped from the side of the mountain. Further evidence of the engineering skill displayed by our Army all over hazardous Korea. Our aim was to put on the show and get back before dark, because we had strict blackout conditions. No headlights at night. Here at Chung Chong with the 7th Division, we welcomed with open arms the luxury of taking a shower. In tent number 1, we disrobed completely, bringing our soiled fatigues to tent number 2 in exchange for clean clothes, into tent number 3 for the refreshing shower, and out of tent number 4 like a production line. Our audience marched in from nearby points. That's one way of getting an audience. Meantime, with a little time on our hands, we inspected the command post area, and especially a captured field artillery piece. We thought it would be an appropriate souvenir to take home, but we couldn't get it into our ditty bags. After the show, our audience was marched back again in military order. Small liaison planes were furnished us the following morning for transportation to our next show point. En route, we flew over the famous Hwachan Reservoir with its one floodgate damaged by our heavy torpedo bomber while still held by the Reds last year, and which has not yet been repaired. At our rendezvous point, Forey, Jerry, and I arrived first, and while waiting for Art and Bob, Forey decided that he ought to the steel helmet weighing 7 pounds, And finally his gun. Where's the foxhole? Oh, well. Bob and Art finally showed up. Their plane taxied in off the landing strip into the parking area, and they joined us once again in jeeps. Not to swallow the river water because it's very dangerous, very contaminating. Forey spent some time asking Sam, a Southern Korean, the shortest and smoothest route, if that's possible, to our next show point. Sam disputed Forey about going this away or that away. He said, you don't go that away, and you don't go this away. The short way was that away. Forey wasn't completely convinced, but we took Sam's word for it and went that away. It was the roughest going we had had, and we ended up 3 miles ahead of the front lines. I can assure you we got back out of there in a hurry. We met Major Charles Newman, executive officer of the 72nd Tank Battalion, a neighbor of ours back home, who invited us to go for a ride in the tank. The next day, bright and early, in an M4 and an M26 tank, we took off for the tank driving range. These amazing monsters of steel travel through fields and water, and where there are no roads, they make their own. We bobbed and swayed past a rustic native bridge, one of the very few spots of beauty untouched by the ravages of war. After swallowing the dust of the tank ahead of us, we welcomed every river or soaked rice paddy. At 35 miles an hour, these units actually ride smoother than a Jeep. They're doing an astounding job in Korea. We headed out from the driving range to view a tactical tank problem which had been set up for that afternoon. Here it was that we gained renewed awe for the infantry, advancing over the hilltop, covered by machine gun fire, and of course, the tanks. This one just missed a landmine. The 76-millimeter guns mounted on these tanks create a tremendous blast, but do a very effective job. General Ruffner, a 2-star general, the chief of staff of the 2nd Division, was there to view the entire action. The mortar squad dropped shell after shell on the hill to be taken, while an innocent countryside home went up in flames. The fire was lit from the tracer bullets of the machine gun. The medical corpsmen were constantly alert to remove casualties from the scene of battle. They load them in the ambulance jeep and take them back to the first aid station, where their wounds were dressed as efficiently as possible under the circumstances, and then were given plasma and removed, quite frequently by helicopter, to an evacuation hospital. Speaking of helicopters, we were privileged to ride in some of these strange-looking craft the next day. As the motor revs up to 350 RPM, they disappear in a cloud of dust and rise straight up into the air. I was unfortunate in that the unit in which I rode boasted an unbalanced rotor, which prevented me from taking satisfactory aerial pictures. After a short 40-minute hop, we arrived at our next location, 6 hours ahead of our equipment, which came by truck. We landed just in time to join the boys at noon chow, and believe me, the food was exceptionally good, as it was all over Korea. In fact, we even had ice cream 3 times. After chow, we set up to do our show for 5,000 Marines at Kum Song, 200 yards off the front lines, with artillery going full blast both ways. This was the second largest audience of our entire tour, and actually the most receptive. They joined in vociferously as we sang Rural Rhythm.
They play rural rhythm, see them sway to rural rhythm. It's okay, rural rhythm.
Yeah, well, off to go to the country dances.
I know well that it's corny. You can yell and say it's corny. Still, it's swell music for me. Better than a big brass band. Clap your hands, hold off your overalls, stamp your feet. What if the cedar falls dance all night? Then till the rooster crows to the music of the hot hillbilly. I go for rural rhythm. I encore rural rhythm. Give me more rural rhythm.
Is offered to shine the shoes and boots of the whole group, 7 of us, for 3,000 won. Sounds like a lot of money, but it's only half a dollar. While our shoes were being shined, we wrote letters home. Speaking of letters, if any of you have sons, brothers, sweethearts, or friends in Korea, do yourselves and us a big favor. Write to them. There's nothing so heartbreaking as watching the boy who doesn't get a letter at mail call. How about writing? Sergeant Bill, like all good soldiers, cleans his sidearm, his bayonet, and his rifle, all important articles of dress. Next day being Sunday, some of the boys attended services. Across the field from the chapel, a squadron of 18 F-86 Sabre jets took off with guns bristling, wing tanks loaded with extra fuel for MiG Alley, in fond hopes of contacting enemy aircraft. As the last one left the field, the sirens announced an alert. One of our 2-place observer planes had been shot up and was coming in. The crash truck and ambulance rushed to the end of the landing strip, but they were unnecessary, as the observer made a perfect 3-point landing, and the pilot was found hanging dead in his harness, shot through the head. The jets returned minus their wing tanks, indicating contact with the enemy. And while we couldn't stay to hear the results of their action, we're happy to report that the score at that point was 44 enemy aircraft to 3 of ours. Our next show was at a field hospital of 600 patients and staff. 2 doctors who were about to operate gave their patient an extra anesthetic. They, too, could listen in the blistering 112-degree sun as we gave forth with Dear Old Girl.
The robin sings above.
We were tired, dog-tired. When a man can sleep on hard duffel in a jolting truck, he's tired. When a man can sit behind the steering wheel of a truck and drop off just like that, he's tired. As our duffel was loaded aboard our plane for the trip back to Tokyo, we were weary. Weary but happy. Happy that we were given the opportunity to sing for 33 one-hour shows in 21 days for 51,000 of our troops in Korea. We were also very happy for a sight once again of Mount Fujiyama. Garbed in our Mae Wests, we landed in Tokyo. Their civilization looked pretty good to us at this time. Incidentally, we heard a song in Korea written by Art Keeney, a GI. It's a pretty thing. It's called Itsumo and means forever and a day in Japanese.
Ever is our lovely word in any language at home. But here's a way of saying it of you, of us three home. Itsumo, Itsumo, Itsumanemo means forever and a day in Japanese. Itsumo, Itsumo, Itsumanemo are the words I love to say in Japanese. A boy and a girl on the Ginza, holding hands as they stroll along. A boy and a girl on the Ginza. If you listen, you'll hear their song. Itsumo, Itsumo, Itsumanemo are the words I love to say in Japanese. Itsumo, Itsumo, Itsumanemo means forever and a day in Japanese. Japanese.
We appreciated the 2 days of rest allowed us in Tokyo. It gave us a chance to see points of interest at the guidance of personnel furnished by the Special Services Division. With the use of the 2 staff cars and the guides, we saw the temples, the formal gardens, memorials to World War II dead, and of course, we went to the bazaars, where we purchased souvenirs for families and friends. Our appreciation and thanks go to the Special Services section of the Armed Forces for making it possible for us to make this trip in order that we could demonstrate barbershop harmony to our boys overseas. Our special thanks to the Air Force, not only because they made aircraft available to us whenever it was needed, but also for their job. Well done. Thanks to the military police, who kept our main supply routes open 24 hours a day. Thanks to the logistics department, who furnished the supplies, equipment, materiel for our front lines. To the Signal Corps, who keep communication lines open even while trucks and tanks ride directly over lines strung on the roads. And of course, thanks to the armored divisions, who with their heavy equipment back up the big play on the front lines. Thanks to the Medical Corps for speedy handling of the difficult task of caring for our casualties, to the extent that even helicopters are used in evacuation of the wounded. Another development of American ingenuity. And of course, our special admiration and thanks for the boys in the infantry, the GIs who are right there 24 hours a day, carrying the weight of battle. Sure, there's destruction. There has to be. This is war. We are sincerely grateful for being given the opportunity to make this 24,000-mile trip. If we have accomplished but a small portion of what we were sent out to do, we are indeed happy. The Buffalo Bills and Phil Embury in Europe, the Cardinals of Madison, Wisconsin and Alaska, and we, Jerry Beeler and the Mid-States 4 in the Far East Command, in singing for our troops all over the world, have tried our utmost to justify the theory behind our barbershop society. Keep America singing.